Okay, so for today, what we're going to discuss is all about, of course, a internet-mediated research. No, so the internet-mediated research is the research conducted through the medium of internet. No, so it pertains to the practice of gathering either medical records, no, or data via the internet directly from research subjects. So the subject uses a web browser to view and respond to questionnaires that are included in an approved research protocol. So other fields such as geography also use internet-mediated research as a research tool. So to give us more details about the topic, let us all welcome our presenter. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sir Abante. So, hello everyone. My name is Chris Felicidario, and as Sir introduced, I will be tackling about the internet mediated research, and I would just like to highlight as well that this is also a part of introduction to research. And as Sir also mentioned, internet mediated research is actually a research wherein it deals with more on technologies. It deals on the data that we are gathering in terms of using the internet, in terms of using the Wi-Fi, in terms of using the data of our cellular phones. And it is not actually only pertains or limited to the data that we are gathering with the internet, but it also relates to the data that we are using, the data that are saved on our smartphones, the data that we are using in terms of uh, different applications, the data that we are using during the interviews. There are also surveys that we will be tackling in this area. So let me move on with my next slide. All right. So first, before anything else, we need to know what is the internet-mediated research. First, it is interchangeably referred to as online research. Uh, and then it also a collection of research data is made possible by being connected through the internet to a functional online environment. And it is a research involving the remote acquisition of data from or about human participants using the internet and its associated technologies. As we all know, we've been used maybe during our college days when we are doing our thesis, doing our micro research, I must say. We've been used on using questionnaires, manual surveys, which is we are not very using the internet in terms of those surveys. Maybe we are just using the internet, the data, when we are actually looking for some questions that we are not informed, for some questions that only Google can answer us, those questions that we might add with our research, that something that you no longer need to ask for participants. So maybe those are the things that we are wondering that we need to use the internet. So that is internet mediated research. And moving on, there is actually a distinction between reactive and non-reactive methodologies. So when we say reactive, it is where participants interact with materials. So one example of this is online surveys, online interviews, and online experimental tasks. So uh, this kind of approach is wherein we are the one who is actually requesting the participants uh, to to take our surveys. One example of this is there is an application known as a Slido. Slido is a type of application where you can type your comments, your suggestions, or any questions you may have. You can type it anonymously. And there are also some like Survey Monkey. I know some of you are familiar with Survey Monkey. It is actually found usually after the end of a presentation, maybe in a browser, and then they will be asking if how was the presentation, how was the blog itself. So those are the types of the reactive approach. One thing of the reactive approach as well is something with regards to the interview. For example, we want to interview a certain people. In example, we need 150 participants. We can have around maybe 10 participants at a time, or if you are so masipag talaga, you can take one participant one by one, which is maybe medyo matrabaho. Pero if you are smart enough, you can do maybe 10 participants in just one sitting. And then the other one is the non-reactive approach. So when we say non-reactive approach, it is where the researcher makes use of data which is collected unobtrusively. When we say unobtrusively, it is data which are not conspicuous, I must say. Uh, Something that is already available publicly. You just need to do data mining. You need to create observations. Some of these, if you will remember, when we are signing up for Facebook account, when we are signing up for Gmail account, there are also data that we are giving it. And although there are users guide, there are also I cannot say how can I say that? Um, there are any guidelines in terms of using data. There are etiquette of how using data, and there are privacy protection that these apps are offering to us. But sometimes there are posts, for example, in Facebook. There are uh, emails that were mistakenly sent. So we need to be mindful of those. And at the same time, if we are requesting for such data, we need to understand that we need to protect as well those information, because sometimes it can be personal, but that's somehow on a reactive approach side. But mostly kapag non-reactive approach, it is a data which is readily available. You do not need to request for it. So basically, that's the thought for the non-reactive approach. Moving on, we will be now be talking about surveys. So when we say surveys, again, those are this is a part of a reactive approach wherein you are the one who are requesting to the participants for such data that you may need for your research. Uh, and since we are talking about the internet mediated research, this is not something that is manual. This is not something questionnaire, hard copy you just sent to someone person in person. So when we say survey about internet mediated research, it is a survey that we with the use of the internet, with the use of the data, with the use of the applications. So I will be giving you some etiquette, some data privacy, something that how are we using, how are we being mindful of those data that we are getting on these surveys. So first, we need to consider the platform. So where do we need to get the data? Where are we going to request it? So there are Facebook, there are Google Docs, and as much as possible, it is advisable to not to use platforms that are requiring uh, third-party service providers. Like if you will remember, in some of the applications that you might use, they are asking for permissions. For example, you need to if you want to log in into this application, you need to log in first with the other application. So that might be very mabusisi. At the same time, the data would be somehow at risk if you do that kind of things. Next, you need to consider when doing surveys is the uptake and dropout. So when we say uptake and dropout, basically considering that you are actually doing your surveys online, so there would be uptake, and you should consider the uptake. So uptake is those persons that would consider to participate with your surveys, and those dropout is that you sent the surveys, however, they would not like to push through with it. So you need to consider those. So for example, if you are targeting 150 participants in a survey, maybe you can try to add a little 20 more, so make it 170 or maybe 200, just so you are ready for some dropouts. And then next is the context. For the context of your survey, it has to be precise and concise. And as much as possible, do not use any jargons, do not use very words that are difficult to understand. So as it will also help the the results of your surveys. It will also help you in your research. And then next is the consent, and it is very important that you always gain consent by a participant. For example, you can add in your survey additional page, maybe uh, asking for the consent, and then uh, somehow you can say that you are requesting this data for the sake of the research that you are uh, currently doing. You can state what are the purpose of your research. So as much as possible, they would know what is the limit in terms of the data that they are providing to you. So that is the same thing as well with the confidentiality. As you may all know, there are also personal data like age, the addresses. As much as possible, if you do not need those things in your data, if you are not maybe you can try to, as much as possible, filter what are your on surveys. So as mentioned, you need to be precise and concise and direct to the point. You can always ask close-ended questions. For example, of close-ended questions are those questions that can be answered by yes or no. Although you can also use the open-ended questions, but as much as possible, it has to relate with the research that you are currently doing. Next is the anonymity. Some of your participants might request, especially if you are doing research in terms of medical research, uh, they would want they would want to participate. However, they are afraid in taking the risk of, or they might be somehow afraid that some of their, for example, colleagues, some of their parents or loved ones not know yet about their um, current status. So we might use the anonymity, where you can take the surveys, you can give them surveys at the same time. You can put it in your research, but in terms of in an anonymous side. And then next is the withdrawal. So it is somehow like of a dropout. So some of the participants that you just sent requests, some of them may withdraw. You may take into consideration that as well. Next is the intellectual property. This is one thing that somehow same thing with the confidentiality. You need to assure them where those data would you use for, what is the purpose of that data, why you are using it, and you need to assure them that you are just using those data for the purpose of the research that you are doing. And then next is the voluntary participation. uh, if you will remember, on some of the applications and some online surveys, you cannot proceed on page 2, you cannot proceed on page 3 if you do not complete all the items on those surveys. So for voluntary participation, you can try to, well, that's good thing as well, but somehow some of them is not applicable really. Those data is not applicable to those participants. So you might want to try to reduce that restriction, so that's it for the voluntary participation. And then last thing is bots. So what is bots? Bots is, if you will remember, I think Facebook has bots previously. I'm not sure right now if they have bots, but basically bots are something that is associated with an application wherein you can put your surveys, you can create questions that are already programmed. For example, in some marketplaces, in some Facebook pages, if you will message them, there are also programmed questions, and there are also programmed answers that you may choose from. And also there are also things to consider, things to be mindful about regarding bots, which will be we need to include the advanced branch logic in your survey. We need to include some open-ended questions, even if these are asking random things and are not related to the actual research contracts. You may ask similar questions a few times to check for the consistencies. For example, is the gender. Next is you need to have a filler item which as participant to respond in a certain way. So these are the things that, uh, as I mentioned, something that are already programmed, already available that the participants may choose. So in this case, you can select the strongly agree, and then disagree. You can create those options in the bots. Moving on, since we tackled already the surveys, we already tackled about some of the technology, some of the online data that you can use using the internet. We are also, aside from the manual interviews, the face-to-face interviews that you need to go to the offices, you need to go house to house, you need to, if you have target market like in a school, you need to go to campuses just to conduct your surveys. Considering that we are already in the modern times and that Zoom is already available, Google Meet, and then some online platforms, even Facebook, even our social medias already have the video call where you can do your interview. So it is very critical and important to know how what is the etiquette of using those data when we are conducting interviews and focus groups using the online data. So when doing interviews and focus groups, there are a number of things to bear in mind when selecting appropriate online software. One thing here is the confidentiality. It simply means to do not use software which uses third-party hosts with users' data. So as mentioned previously, there are applications that are using third-party services wherein somehow it is not advisable because, well, you can use that as long as it is you search for it, that you are sure that the consent, that the agreements, the privacy, data privacy are all secured. We just want we just do not want to do it whenever that we are not sure of those third parties, and whenever that the data that we are gathering from that applications would be at risk. Next is the consent. It is very very important, as I am mentioning, that you are asking for consent with the participants. And during the interviews, of course, before the interviews, before sending out your invitations, you might want to send them an email, or you may want to ask them through uh, Facebook chats. You may try to contact them, send them a message before conducting interview. And the next is the antivirus. Since we are conducting our interviews on the online platform, it is also very important that we have the antiviruses, the up-to-date antiviruses software installed in our laptop, PCs, and computer, just to make sure that we are avoiding any risks uh, to, from others to get from attackers to get data by our participants. It is need to bear in mind that the data from the participants is personal and we need to protect them. And then next is the internet network. So when using the internet network, we need to use always the private internet network, our private Wi-Fi, because sometimes we are conducting interviews in a public places, and those internet, those Wi-Fi are very risk in terms of hacking, phishing, and some of the attackers might uh, try to uh, take in consideration those weaknesses of the public Wi-Fi. So it is advisable, if it is available to use your private Wi-Fi, make use of it. Next is the app permissions. If you remember during for example, Zoom meetings, they will be requiring you to especially if you are using your phones, they would be requiring if they can have an access with your contacts. They would be asking if they can have access with your gallery camera. So you need to take consideration as well on those items. Next is the authentication. As much as possible, we may want to put an additional layer of security in our platforms, because once you lose it, internet is very broad, social media is very crowded already. Once you send those, you need to bear in mind as well that always that once you send, uh, once you leak data in the social media world, there's no turning back. So we need to bear that in mind as well. And then for the recording, even though you sent an invite, you sent for a consent during the invite, I think it is also under our law, if you are recording someone, you need to ask for consent, even if it's online. For example, you are already in the interview, the participant is already in the room. You can ask them, I will be recording our meeting just so we will, in case that I might forget some of the notes that you are mentioning, I can go back with the recording and make sure that what you say is accurate to my notes. At the same time, I can add some notes, I can use it, because there's no such thing as a perfect thing, especially if you are just dealing with paper and pens. So, but it is very important to that you are asking for their permissions, because for a fact, it is their voice, it is their videos that are revealing in these kind of interviews. Next is the capacity. If you are doing focus groups, you need to consider if does the software have a maximum capacity on audio or video calls. Next is the time zones. Given that some of you, well, uh, maybe some of us may not be doing some research outside the Philippines, no? Pero I would like to tackle as well that, well, maybe this is not typically for a time zone as well, but maybe you might want to ask the availability of the person that you might interview. Uh, and then we will be talking about now for the smartphone data. So as I mentioned, it is not only those data that we can get from the internet, those data that we can get using our online platforms, but as well as the smartphone data. Because for a fact, some of these applications may be asking for the data that are available on our phones already, like the contacts, galleries, and some of the documents that you are saving in your cell phone that might be at risk as well. So of course you need to gain consent. You may inform the participant of those metrics, and of course the practicalities why you are using those smartphone data. And we also need to protect those data that we are gathering from the smartphone data. And then next one is the online data. So I already mentioned it numerous time a while ago. You need to work on the anonymity, the privacy, and you need to always inform. You need to get consent, gain consent from the participants. And then lastly is the recruitment for the for reactive forms of IMR. As with any research, make sure any written adverts have been approved ethically alongside other ethics documentations. Adverts should be concise, user-friendly. As mentioned, you need to avoid jargon, those terms that are hard to understand. And if you are adverting on social media, you need to carefully consider which communities are representative and relevant, and state this in your ethics documentation. Be considerate. Bear in mind to the online communities that you are seeking help from. Engage in these communities prior to your research. Build rapport. Come back to any adverts to check whether people have asked questions, and return to show things at the end of the research process. So basically, those are the etiquettes, the ethics that we need to consider when doing our uh, internet mediated research. So I think that concludes my presentation. Thank you. Hello.
Muted ka, sir.
Yep. I think, sir,
Okay.
that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, sir, no, for your well comprehensive discussions about the topic. No, I'll just want to add, no, again, of course, IMR, no, techniques are being used in numerous investigation in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, no, or COVID-19 epidemic, no. These IMR guidelines, however, leaves out the matter of disclosing a substantial danger of injury, no, to oneself or others, no. Of course, the epidemic affect emotional and psychological health, no, making more likely even the investigating non-sensitive issues rather, making the need of counseling even more urgent. So those experiencing abuse or serious mental illness may also take advantage of the chance to obtain treatment provided by study participations of different. So actually our presenter could able to discuss a broadened content, no, of the internet mediated research. So that's it. Thank you and congratulations, sir.